Hello, everyone. Dr. Caps here again with our podcast and our YouTube channel, Dancing with the Darkness. If you've listened before, you know what we're about. If you're a new listener today, this is a podcast about the real life struggles from a personal and raw point of view living with CPTSD. Those of you that have CPTSD, this is absolutely going to resonate with you. Those that are trying to get more educated, or maybe you're a spouse or a loved one of someone with CPTSD, we are here to help you understand your significant other, the things that go on with them, and ways that you can plug in and help also. It is a struggle, but at the end of the day, I want to also let you know that this isn't a podcast just about the bad things and about the darkness. It's about us leading that dance and not just surviving, but learning how to thrive and plug some of these naughty bad things into a way that can be very, very positive, affirming, and validating. So do us a favor, if you haven't already, if this channel or this podcast resonates with you, please like and subscribe. The way these algorithms and all of these crazy things work, I don't understand them, but the only way that we can get this voice out to the public is with your support and your help. And we are purely here to educate and help individuals. So the last videos that we have been going over, some of the precursory things, the reasons that we have attachment injuries, and we end up with very dysfunctional attachment wounds or attachment. They call them styles. I'm gonna, for the purpose of our videos, we're gonna call them strategies. Because in my own life with CPTSD, I have noticed that I have fluctuated between these different attachment styles. And so I'm going to call them strategies because I believe that it is a way for us to navigate the world and in our own way to be safe. And so if we're going to start a series on attachments, last video, we started that foundation trying to help you understand some things that lead up to the attachment. And today, we can't really start talking about attachment and attachment wounds or attachment strategies until we understand completely where these things really come from, okay? And so the foundation is not just the abuse, and it's not just the developmental piece of this. I want you to understand, I know you've probably heard the term inner critic. The more we talk about PTSD, CPTSD, even now we're seeing with depression and anxiety, we see the word inner critic. The problem with this is I don't like the fact that it's just thrown out there and thrown around, and people don't really understand 100% what the inner critic is. So I'm going to tell you, and mind you, I have 5 decades of experience, okay? So I think I know what I'm talking about. I'm going to tell you what this inner critic really looks like. But I'm also going to introduce you to another thing called the outer critic. And so we need to understand, especially with CPTSD, these two guys are hand in hand, okay? And so if you've ever heard the expression, me, myself, and I, when people want to, they want to be bravado or whatever. They're like, it's just me, myself, and I. Okay, well, there's a legitimate explanation to that statement when it comes to CPTSD. Because when I think of me, myself, and I, one of the things that CPTSD does is it isolates. And if it's not society isolating us, it's us isolating ourselves, which is one of our very negative coping strategies. But when I think of me, myself, and I, and it's taken time to understand who the myself and I are, the me, myself, and I, okay, so the me is that inner child that is in there. It's the person that God actually crafted me to be before I was even in the womb. And then I developed, I had epigenesis, and I had temperament, which was 52% of who I was, the unique part of who I was, before I ever even came out of the womb. Now, the developmental trauma starts in utero. That's what people need to understand. So the lack of caring, the lack of oxytocin, the lack of bonding hormones that my mother had, because she really did not want to have me. Okay, this was already starting the developmental trauma piece. Okay, I was already forming into a little human being that was going to have challenges. Okay, my brain was already wired and starting to pre-wire synapses and connections that were not healthy. Okay, and so we're not going to necessarily talk about that in detail, but I need you to understand how this progresses. Okay, and so we have these stages of psychological development, and basically by the time we're 7 years old, we have a very good idea of who we are and who we're going to be. And from then on, the factors that influence us are going to continue to be outside stimuli, environment, more trauma that you go through. There's different things that are going to influence, and they're going to exacerbate certain things about you. Okay, but by the age of 7, we have already kind of been pre-wired for certain things. And the thing that we really need to discuss when we're talking about trauma and we're talking about abuse and we're talking about CPTSD is we have to talk about the inner and the outer critic. So the me part of me is who God crafted me to be. And now I have these two, we're a set of triplets, okay? And so I have these other two parts of myself, okay? The myself and I. Now, the myself and the I, it doesn't matter which one of them is the other, but one of those is the inner critic and one of those is the outer critic. And so this is already part of my identity as I go into the world and as I mature and as I grow up. These two brothers or triplets or identical selves, whatever you want to call them, these two identities that live inside me, inside my brain, are already a solid part of me, okay? And so they develop just like I'm developing, okay? So over the years, through the abuse, and we're not going to go into that. If you want to know about what I've been through, you can easily go to the beginning of my podcast, and I'm very forthright and very forthcoming. I'm not going to be ashamed of who I am anymore. It is what it is. And so in order to show you a story of redemption and hope, I have to throw in the bad stuff so that you understand that God really does do miracles, whether we believe it or not. And so this inner critic is this nasty little dude that continually reminds me of all of the bad things that have happened to me, all of the bad words that have been told to me, all of the insults, all of the abuse. He reminds me of this constantly, okay? So all of the things that my mother and my father and bullies or whatever, various abusers in my life have said to me have forged this identity, okay? This identity of inferiority, this identity of never being good enough, this identity of being a failure, this identity of, I'm never going to be what I need to be. I'm never going to succeed. I'm always going to fail no matter what I do. And so this nasty little guy, what he does is when we talk about trauma and we talk about the 4F response, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, we need to understand that this becomes a permanent fixture in our lives. This isn't something temporary. We literally go through life in this adrenal state of the 4F response every single day. And outside stimuli, outside things in the environment can absolutely influence that. It can exacerbate it. It can make it worse. Okay, but the thing is, we're in this constant state all the time, which produces a mixture of really bad depression sometimes and really bad anxiety sometimes. And so when we get into the diagnostic world with psychology, you can see, based on the DSM and how they diagnose, that there's some criteria that's easily met there for either bipolar or borderline personality. There's all of these misdiagnoses that happen because it seems like we may even be in a cyclic mood, but really we're not. This is actually a conjoining relationship between anxiety and depression, and they're holding hands and they're singing Kumbaya, and in their world everything is great because this is the way that it's supposed to be, because we've been conditioned and we've been programmed, we've been developed, and we have grown in this environment that you were born a piece of crap, you're still a piece of crap, you're always going to be a piece of crap, okay? You're never going to be loved, you're never going to have your needs met, you're never going to be appreciated, you are never going to be good enough to be in a relationship, you're never going to be good enough, for someone to love you back, okay? You're unlovable, you're broken, you're defective. And so this is over and over and over. It becomes a mantra, and it just continues on and on. And so what does this look like? Okay, so this looks like the 4F response, and we're going to break this down. Now, fight or flight is kind of easy for anyone to understand, okay? We get into these active shooter classes and all this other stuff that I've taught and done and in the military. Fight or flight is pretty easy for people to understand, okay? We have what's called stress inoculation training in the military. There's all kinds of stuff, and it's designed to, help you either get out of the way or to be a combatant, okay? And so that fight or flight is not so difficult to understand, okay? It's the the dog that gets backed up into a corner, his tail's between his legs, and now he has no opportunity left but to figure out a way to get away, and if he can't get away, he has to fight, right? So it's not, even if you haven't experienced trauma and you're looking at something from the outside in, it's not hard for you to understand that part of the trauma response. This is very natural, as a matter of fact. God actually created us to have that response to protect us, okay? So this is part of God's design, but now guess what? It gets corrupted, because now, as a small child, by the time we're 7 years old, if you scan our brain and you sit it next to a scan of a soldier or a Marine or whoever that has come back from some severe combat, our brains look similar. Well, guess what? That's not God's design, and that's not how it's supposed to be. We should not have a brain that is consumed with trauma and consumed with synapses and connections and corrupted circuits based on trauma. So now we're going to go into the world, and the rest of our development as we age, as our chemistry changes, as our hormones change, all of these things that happen in life, it's all based on this 4F response and these connections that did not develop properly or correctly. And so we have challenges, okay? I'm not going to say I hate the word disorder, because when you say disorder, it connotates permanence. This is permanent. You've got this disorder, you're never going to get well. I don't believe in that. I believe that we can get well. And so, and I've proven it in a lot of ways. I'm not perfect, but I have proven that you can get well in a lot of ways. I would not be sitting here. I would not be talking to you today. I would not be sharing my experiences. I would not have the fortitude or the strength to do this if it wasn't part of healing and getting well. So that's what you need to understand. So this inner critic becomes that co-pilot, one of the co-pilots of this car that we're driving or this plane that we're flying, and he's part of us. And here we go into the world, and now this guy is constantly reminding us of what we were already told as a child, what we were already told by abusers or oppressors or whatever. And so the problem is that our body is not necessarily viewing this as a bad thing, because it's used to it, and it's a sense of identity for us inside out, because this is how we've developed, this is what we're used to. And there's even an element, a very dysfunctional one, of comfort, okay? When we are in that adrenal response, and when we are getting oppressed or abused or mistreated or whatever it is, the inner critic is like, see, I told you so. This is where we're safe. You just need to look in the mirror, and you need to accept that all those things that you've been told you are. So just accept your identity and move on, okay? So I want you to understand that that's what it's like. It's literally like having your mother or your father or your caregiver or your abuser or whoever it is. They're literally on your shoulders, and they're telling you all day long, no matter what you do, you're not good enough. You're going to fail. Even though you did that, you know what? You didn't do that, okay? So it's not good enough. So it's causing all of these cognitive distortions or unhealthy thinking styles that we call them in CBT. So we're discounting the positive. We can't see anything positive at all. We've got this negative filter where all we see is negative, all or nothing thinking, mind reading. We're doing all of these cognitive things in our prefrontal cortex of our brain that are literally adding logic and reason to this core set of beliefs that are not true. Okay? So now I want to enter into my other friend, the outer critic. Now, the outer critic comes in kind of like a knight in shining armor, right? He comes in with the misguided premise of being your protector. And so what the outer critic does is if you meet someone and you start to develop feelings, or if you develop a friendship or any good feeling that enters into your body because of another individual, dopamine, serotonin, and if you get really close to someone, you might even experience some oxytocin, which is amazing. And, oxytocin becomes a very foreign thing for you because of this whole developmental piece, okay? You did not get the oxytocin in development from your mother, the nurturing, there was abandonment, whatever it is. So now this comes in and it's like heroin. I mean, this is like, whoa, oxytocin, okay? And it's this amazing thing. It's euphoric and your body reacts. Well, knocking on the door, here comes outer critic. Outer critic comes busting through the door and he says, whoa, 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 buddy, whoa. No one out here is safe, okay? Your mother, who gave birth to you, was not safe. She hurt you. Your father, who was supposed to take care of you, he wasn't safe. He hurt you. These other people that came into your life and acted like they loved you, they abused you, okay? So he is reminding you, guess what? The world is corrupt. Everyone out here is bad. Everyone out here is unsafe. There is no one out here that you can trust. And so you see how these guys start holding hands, right? The inner critic, look at that. I'm doing that crazy 80s dance. The inner critic and the outer critic are now conjoined. And they're like, see? And so me is in the middle, that person that I really am, okay? But me is trapped in a sanctuary back here. We've got him locked away in a very, very, very fortified castle, right? With a moat and guards and the whole 9 yards. You're not getting to this guy, okay? And the inner critic is making sure that he stays in, and the outer critic is making sure nobody gets in, okay? So that you can understand that on a very basic level. And so these guys are holding hands, and they're not going to allow you to experience anything good, okay? They're not going to allow you to experience love. They're not going to let you experience caring or nurturing or any of these things that you desperately need, that you've needed since you were conceived, because it's who we are. It's who God crafted us to be. He crafted us to be social. He crafted us to want to be part of a pack. He crafted us to want to love and to bond and to be connection. We all need this, okay? So these are critical needs that you've needed since you were in the womb, that have been taken away from you and corrupted and destroyed, and now you go into life and it continues on with this inner critic and this outer critic. And so I need you to understand these two voices, these two identities that are in there talking to you, because we cannot start talking about attachment until you understand why you have the attachment wounds or the attachment strategies that you have, okay? And so we have to be very aware of the inner critic that is trying to keep us locked in our prison, and we have to be very aware of the outer critic that is making sure that no one gets in. And, like I said, it's very confusing. And we're going to talk a little bit about the science behind this, the reason why it's so confusing. So I want to talk about fawn for a minute. When we see fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, fawn is the one that really nobody kind of grasps. They're like, yeah, okay. We can understand fight or flight pretty easy, and even freeze. Freeze makes sense to us, okay? And before we talk about fawn, I'll just say a little bit about freeze, okay? So freeze is actually meant to be a positive part of the trauma response, and that's what we don't understand. See, we have the sympathetic nervous system, and this is the nervous system that gets all riled up. And you have the adrenaline and the cortisol and that response of fight or flight. Okay, this is supposed to be for short term, and it's meant for us to get out of trouble quick. Okay, surge of adrenaline, the blood goes to your muscles. It's actually a brilliant, amazing design because God made it that way, okay, to protect us. But it gets corrupted and it gets prolonged, and you stay in that state, and then everything gets all screwed up. So we're basically in that response all the time. But now we have to understand that we also have freeze or fawn in there. We're not just doing the fight or flight when it comes to CPTSD. We also have freeze and fawn that we need to talk about. Now, the reason freeze gets a little complicated is that freeze is actually part of the parasympathetic nervous system. This is actually part of the response to calm us down, okay? So your mind and your body, when it comes to freeze, are actually trying to do something positive. And basically, it's like, stop for a second, breathe, take it all in, okay? If we look at the animal world and we look at freeze, if a gazelle or a zebra or whatever is out there and there's a predator there, the first thing they do is they freeze because they don't want to be seen. Okay? Maybe this predator won't see me, and then I don't have to do the fight or flight. Okay? So I want you to think about that for a second. God gave them stripes on the zebras so they blend in not only to the grass, but it also causes confusion for the predator because when they run in a herd, it's very hard to distinguish one target. God's design is perfect. So we have that freeze response, and it can either be a very good thing or it can be something that is catastrophic, because if a deer goes into the road and it freezes when you're coming at it with a car, unfortunately we hit the deer a lot of times, and I've messed up some automobiles, and that was just naturally what the animal does. I'm going to freeze for a second and see if this whatever it is sees me. And then sometimes they will kick in with fight or flight and you see the deer run off. Okay, that happens more often than not. But I want you to understand how this freeze response acts. And so it's very, very difficult in the trauma world and in the CPTSD world, because this is actually meant to be part of the system, our nervous system calming down. Okay, so I want you to understand how that plays into this. And so when we're going to talk about attachments, the one that really makes the greatest difference when it comes to attachments is fawning. And so fawning, if you look up the definition, it's kind of like, you're fawning, okay? You're surrendering, okay? Now, what does fawning look like in CPTSD? It gets really nasty, because fawning can make you even go against your own core beliefs. It can make you develop your own moral wounds, because you will lie sometimes, you will hide, you will steal, you will do whatever you can to negotiate the threat. Okay, so that means when you're getting confronted by somebody and you fawn, you may decide to agree with them. You may decide to comply. And so as a kid, what that looked like is it opened the door for me to get abused even more, right? If I let this person do this terrible thing to me, maybe I'll be okay. And so that's how you enter into the sexual abuse and to all of the other things, because you think, if I just comply, if I just let him beat the hell out of me, or if I just let her do this to me, it'll go away and I can move on. Okay, so we're stuck between fight or flight and freeze. We're stuck in this horrible world of fawning, which is actually, it can be absolutely catastrophic. And so the reason why it's so catastrophic with your attachments is that it is about the connection. It is about us desperately wanting to connect, desperately wanting to be nurtured, desperately wanting to be part of something. Okay, so we actually connect with the abuser. We connect with the people that are doing bad things to us, because we are so desperate just to have a connection and to have an attachment. And so I want you to understand that fawning, although it sounds very benign, this is actually the worst part of the trauma response, especially when it comes to CPTSD, because what fawning does is it keeps us stuck. So fawning is not only going to keep the door open for people to mistreat us or to exploit us, but it's also going to keep the door closed for us ever having a meaningful and healthy connection. Okay? And so we need to understand at a very basic level what fawning is before we start talking about attachments, because attachments are one of the core things of our psychological development, and it's not just the physiological or the science or the medicine or the psychology or even the neuroscience that we're talking about. We're talking about God's actual design for us. Okay? And so when we look at temperament, and we're going to talk about that later in other videos, part of temperament is affection. Our level of affection. How much do we need? How much do we project? And so then based on affection, we get into these other things like our different love languages and what we express and what we want. And there's so many things that make us who we are as a human being. Okay? We talked last week about the protocol that I've developed, and that's one of the reasons why I did it for CPTSD, is that we have to look at all of these things. We are not going to be able to even scratch the surface of healing and developing a better self with CPTSD until we look at all of these elements that got us to where we are. And so we talked about fawning, and we talked about how it gets you stuck. Okay? And so I want you to really, really think about that as we get ready to move into attachments, because we're going to refer back to that trauma response, that 4F response. But fawning is going to be a big one because it really does have the critical core elements of why we have dysfunctional, disorganized, anxious, avoidant, dismissive, whatever. There's lots of ways to coin the terms, but we have very unhealthy attachment styles. And by having these unhealthy attachment styles, it keeps us stuck, because there's core things that we have to have in life in order to be healthy and to be a healed individual, okay? And one of those is attachment. We have to be attached. We have to be connected. We have to be able to give and receive affection and love. And so as long as we're stuck in this pattern of dysregulated nervous system and stuck in this pattern of a disorganized or an unhealthy attachment, we cannot understand the healing process for CPTSD and how we need to move forward. I hope that this video was not too informative. I'm trying to just give you a very brief nugget style video on the different elements before we get into talking about actual attachments in the next series of videos. If you celebrate Easter, by the way, I want to say Happy Easter to everyone. It's a major cornerstone of my faith, understanding that Jesus went through all of the suffering he did, and then today he rose. It's a great thing to think about in the world of CPTSD for me, because it's a symbolism of a new beginning. It's a symbolism of Christ overcoming the world. And with his strength and with his love, we too can overcome the world, and we can be the best version of ourselves. Until next time, I'm praying for each one of you. God bless you. If you have comments, please put them on here. We welcome your comments. And like I said, if you're reached by what we're saying, if this is resonating with you, do us a favor and like and share the channel. If you're watching on YouTube, share the channel. Please. And also we are on Spotify and Podbean if you're listening. Thank you so much. God bless, and we'll talk to you next time.